Hey everybody, good to see you back again. So we've got another transmission assembly episode for 1113. We're going to start throwing shift rails, forks, guide blocks, detent blocks, and all related parts and pieces into that transmission. So I just wanted to do just a quick dry run assembly of all these pieces here. I've spent the last 4 evenings after work, just a couple hours, few hours each night, cleaning, inspecting, deburring, assembling, just getting all this stuff ready, making sure that everything here was in good condition. And I'll tell you what, I am no connoisseur, not by a long shot, but for me, this might as well be art. I can just sit and look at mechanisms like this all day. And if I would refresh the yellow paint on those cast iron blocks, let me tell you what, that could be like a desktop decoration piece right there. So many different cues, so many contrasts. I like the polished steel rail against the dull gray appearance of the forged forks. And we've got, I could do, we got the square heads of the lock bolts to contrast. And I could probably polish up these fold-over locks, add just a little bit more contrast. I most likely won't, but yeah, purchased like these locks on the front. I purchased these triple tab ones there. I made that one. Just kind of getting all this stuff just ready for reassembly to get it put back in that case. But first, as long as we're kind of on the topic of fold-over locks again, comment section under the last video had a lot of questions wondering why we didn't put any fold-over locks beneath the hardware in the bell housing. We just have nuts and lock washers. So, general rule of thumb with Caterpillar back in this era was they relied heavily upon fold-over locks or lock wires or other means of retention, additional means of retention, I should say, in compartments that were pretty much sealed up. You really couldn't do visual inspections on them. And they also had rotating assemblies inside where if anything came loose, everything would grind itself apart in short order. So that's why we've got fold-over locks on the bearing caps for the bevel shaft. We have fold-over locks beneath every fastener in the main gear compartment. And that assembly on the bench right there is no exception. But you get in the bell housing here, it's not quite so critical because, these are pretty well completely sealed off after everything's assembled. You can't really look in there, do a quick inspection, make sure everything seems all right. But we have this cover that would be removed for accessing, greasing the clutch, adjusting the clutch. You can, with reasonable access, look down and see that everything still looks all right in there. Plus, if something were to come loose in here, about the worst that could happen was the clutch could kind of pick it up, maybe throw it against the wall, and it comes to rest down on the bottom of the housing. And really no harm, no foul. Other than you have a loose component in there, usually if an operator is paying close enough attention to the machine, they will be able to flag that something doesn't feel right, sound right, whatever. And also remember, we're relying heavily on the parts manual, heavily on the workshop manual. Those two sources indicate where fold-over locks were used, what type were used, and how many were used. So we've just kind of been sticking right along with all of that stuff as it was designed, as it was originally assembled. So if it indicates a fold-over lock is used, I've been using it. And if it indicates like just a plain lock washer was used, that's the route we're going with that too. So now back to the story. All right, so everything's disassembled again. Couple of fun facts here. All three of the shift forks are identical on D2, 4B, 37, 36 on each one. The only difference is in the rails and where they are positioned on each rail, as well as where the detent pockets are. So, and you can see I got a few other rails here and another guide block. And we have our selected articles from Service Magazine's book out on the bench because in the last video, Steve Sild posted up a very good question in the comment section. He says, this is a question for Squatch or anyone who can answer it. Can you actually get two gears engaged at the same time on the D2? I can imagine it's possible with loose shift forks or fork rails, but does it ever happen in practice? Excellent question, Steve. And this is something I was going to touch on initially when I was doing the disassembly on 1113, but then decided against it because it was going to be probably better explained later. Like right now when we have all these parts nice and clean, we can actually see them and pick them up and look at them without getting disgusting. Now, as is the case with so many other things on 1113, all of this is first generation gear shift interlock stuff. But over here we have the later generation gear shift interlock out of that 5U parts machine. And I also want to use an article from our magazine right here, our book, titled Gear Shift Interlock for D2. So it deals with this updated system right here, and I did check my manuals. This became standard at tractor number 5U1 or 4U1 as well. None of the J series tractors originally had this setup, but it states an improvement to the gear shifting mechanism on the new 4-inch bore D2 tractor to reduce the possibility of engaging the transmission into 2 gears simultaneously can be applied to any older 3 3/4 bore D2 tractors that may be experiencing difficulty of this nature. As shown in the illustration, figure 2, the 4F6483 rear shifter shaft bracket, which is this piece, is drilled transversely to permit the insertion of steel balls between adjacent shafts. Notches in the shafts, 1 in each of the 2 outside shafts and 2 in the center shaft, line up when the transmission is in neutral. Now note that whenever a shaft is moved, it forces the steel ball into the notch in the adjacent shaft, thereby positively locking the adjacent shaft in the neutral position. Note also that moving the middle shaft, as illustrated, locks both outside shafts. Moving either of the outside shafts will lock only the middle shaft without restraining the movement of the other outside shaft. However, in most cases of the transmission becoming locked in 2 gears, investigation has shown that movement of adjacent shafts was responsible. The new lock should eliminate practically all complaints of the transmission getting into 2 gears simultaneously. To install the improved lock on D2 tractors not so equipped requires the following parts. And as you can see the drilling that goes through, and I've placed both of those steel balls loosely in those bores to show you how that is all positioned. And you can see the corresponding notches that have been cut into the shift rails that interact with them. And you can see the first generation 1113 has no drilling, no pockets for any detent balls in there, and there are no notches on any of the shift rails. They are perfectly round. And their illustration probably does a better job of, showing it than what I could do with these loose pieces here. But you can see the middle shaft has been moved from the neutral position, and since the notches are down below the detent balls, the straight sides of the shaft have forced them into the notches of both adjacent shafts, and it's a mechanical impossibility for either of those to move at this point. So if the middle shaft was returned to the neutral position, the notches would line there, and then you could move either of the outer shafts, but then it would, like they said, lock the one directly adjacent to it. And you need to keep that in mind when you're taking these apart, because some of the J series tractors could have had this upgrade, and all of the U series tractors are supposed to have it. And you do need to completely remove one shaft at a time from this detent block when you're disassembling all this in order to get the other ones out. Otherwise, they will lock tight. This is a very effective means of, providing a good interlock to prevent more than one of these shafts from moving out of that block at a time. So, and then you also have to make sure not to drop those detent balls down in the transmission, especially on reassembly. And if you do, you must find those before you go any further. So, personally, I've never had a D2 that's become locked in 2 gears at one time. Even old 2115, where everything, including the detents, the rails, the forks, and the gears were all very, very worn. But it's something that apparently had been coming up back in the day with, service calls, field reports, things like that. So I just want to make everybody aware that even some of the earlier tractors may still have that upgrade in them. And honestly, good question, Steve. Thanks for bringing that up. It was something that I'd been meaning to get to, and I'm glad I was able to explain it. All right, we'll begin by sliding the front guide block into the 2 holes at the front of the case. Looking in from the bell housing now, we have this gasket that goes and covers over where the 4 bolts go. And this metal plate goes over the top of that. And now remember, we're going to have the fine thread bolts going into the guide block holes and the coarse thread bolts going into the case holes. So it's going to go fine, and then coarse. And under the bolts, we're going to use 2 of these T-329 fold-over locks. These are a couple that I have purchased. So shout out to the boys down at Floor and Tractor Parts. They're the ones that hooked me up with these. Saved me a little bit of time cutting and drilling anyhow. Appreciate it, guys. So our first fine thread is started. Here's a coarse thread. Go into the case. Another fold over lock with another fine thread. And the other coarse. And with the bolts all tight, once again, we're going to hold off on folding any locks until the assembly is complete. So, got you set back down with the mag mount here. We'll start throwing forks and rails in now. So here's the order in which it seems to work best for me. We'll start with 3/4. So we'll place the fork into the gears, and this one is positioned with the offset going forward. And now we'll put the rail in, and for identification, this is the 4B3742 rail. They're all stamp marked down in the pocket down there. It might be kind of hard to see on the camera, but that's one easy way to tell them all apart. So rail goes into the bevel gear compartment and then is fed through the fork, and we land in this this outside bore over here in the detent block. Now we'll place the 1 and 5 fork again with the cant facing forward. And this rail is the 4B3743. Line that in. It goes right down the middle. And finally, second in reverse. So this fork cants to the rear. That's the only one that actually goes that direction. So, and the rail is the 4B3741. Same process as the rest. Feed it all the way back into the bevel gear compartment. This one has to go a ways. And then through the fork and into the guide block. And once again, with all 3 rails moved as far forward as they will go, we will install this rear guide block. So I'll try to keep my hands out of the way as much as possible. I'll tell you what, I think I can reach in through the bevel compartment. Yep, you guys can have a better view of what's going on. So here's where 1113 is making life easy for us at this point. All first generation stuff. We don't have the drilling in the block that has the detent balls. We don't have the rails that have the notches. We can just align all 3 with the block and slide it on. If that was the later style that had the detents, we'd be keeping track of those balls, making sure they don't fall out. We'd have to also install 1 rail at a time, get the ball into the groove, and then do the one next to it, and then repeat the process for the third. So this is where first gen makes it quite a lot easier. So just have to start the bolts. Each one has a new fold over lock, of course. And once again, bolts are tight, locks are in place, but nothing folded, not until we're through. And put the shift rail travel stop in. Fold over lock beneath the bolts. And once again, bolts tight. That kind of goes without saying on the old channel anymore. So, and we can start throwing the detent plungers in. And you can see I've been coating everything with assembly grease up here. Works a lot better if this stuff does not go together completely dry. So, third plunger in right there. They're all seated. Drop the springs in on top. Now we can set the guide plate. Also doubles as the hold down. New fold over locks beneath the bolts. I'll just start these by hand and then tighten them in. Okay, final step now is to install and tighten the lock bolts that will center and retain the forks to the rails. And I like to put these bolts in last like this because guide blocks are both in place, tightened down, so the rails are kind of on the axis they want to be, and the detents are all tight, exerting tension down into those pockets, so they're all basically flat where they want to be, and the forks are all hung in the gears where they want to be. So we might as well put the bolts in as long as everything is as happy as it's going to be, right? So okay, there, just doing the final function check here, making sure detents were all happy. I've checked all 3 rails, forks, all the gears, everything is as it should be, so we can make all this permanent. Alright, the only 2 fold-over locks in the bell housing are folded, and we have everything in here. Lock right there, lock right there. I lock wired the 3 bolts for the shift forks in the same manner that I've seen them in every D2 I've ever been into. I know there is right, correct, and proper lock wiring methods. I'm more of a fold-over lock guy, so besides the manual shows them just like that anyway. Nice listening to somebody else's eyelid twitch for a change, right? All right, fold-over lock, fold-over lock, fold-over lock. We're all done in there, so the last piece we need to put in today is the shift interlock mechanism. So we've got the shaft, we've got the collar, and then the arm that goes in the bell housing, and new taper pins, 3B1155. And they're even in the old Pac-Man logo bag, and they have remnants of some Cosmolini goodness all over there. Once again, the fine folks at Floor and Tractor supplied me with these, so shout out once again to those guys. Much appreciated. Let's get these pieces in here and call it an episode, shall we? Okay, collar goes in just on top of the detent plungers, and the shaft goes in from the other side. And before you get the shaft all the way through, you want to make sure to start the arm on it in the bell housing here. A little bit of a sideways shot, I apologize, but as good as we can do at the moment. And we line up the taper pin bore. And these new old stock taper pins I got from Florin, they also have that split leg design on the end. I hadn't seen that before, so I thought the original one I knocked out of 1113 here was just an oddity, but apparently they may have been that way back in the day. Of course, how many of these pins have I taken out of D2s where those had already been broken off because they've been in and out several times, right? So, all right, line that in, going the correct way. And we'll seat it home. Okay, I use this small chisel to spread those legs a little bit. That gives you a little bit of insurance in case that loosens in the taper. It can't just drift its way out. So roll this back upright again. We go back into the bell housing now and install the lock bolt into the arm. This is the same lock bolt as the ones that hold the forks to the rails, and I've got a liberal coating of grease on there. So this is one area I do like to back these things up a little bit. It can get rusty up there, and longtime viewers of the channel will know I personally don't care much for anti-seize. So when I need something to work, I just go to grease. It does everything I need and more. So, and we've got the bolt tightened down, lock wires in place, and that interlock is rolling just like it should. Looking good. Now we can drive in both of the end plugs. And we did it. All right, so, you know, I'm not afraid to admit it. That's one fine looking assembly in there. And hopefully some of the detail I go into about the various designs kind of lends, you know, an appreciation for it and for how they designed it, how they put it together, the hand fitting process of everything. That's kind of, well, that's part of the enthusiasm for me. Just the way these things are put together and just the craftsmanship that went into making every last piece, you know. I don't know. I enjoy it. It's fun. So, all right, we should be pretty much done inside that compartment. Finally, we can start moving into getting some covers put on things. We'll probably tackle this disorganized mess here in the next video. You can see the top cover is nasty yet, and the gear shifters, you know, kind of in disarray, and things need some work, a little bit of reconditioning, a lot of cleaning. So we'll start getting that underway and then probably move into main clutch and bell housing components. You can see I have some interlock linkages here that I've been slowly working on, trying to get the best of what I have put together, and move into main clutch and then steering clutches after that. So that's kind of the line of progression that we can count on seeing coming up here. So once again, thank you everyone, really appreciate it. And memberships, like I said, are available down below. If you like ad-free content, or if you like extras, behind the scenes, stuff like that, we kind of started having some fun over there, showing just some of the trials, the adventures, the misadventures, and just plain work that goes into getting things where we're finally ready to start recording. And sometimes I'm at my best over there, sometimes I'm at my worst. You just don't know, right? So, but anyway, hope to see you guys back again.